forget for not watching the film in advance, so I watched it with you all today. How you doing, Chris?
Yeah, I'm doing well.
All right.
Thanks everyone for coming out. I mean, this is an incredible set of films. I wish the other filmmakers were here. I think this is extremely powerful.
Well, we appreciate you being here. And last year you were here with that incredible film, The Price of Safety. And that was your first film submitted, and your first film. And why don't you tell me where that is right now?
Sure. So for those of you who might not have seen my other film, The Price of Safety, it was exploring issues in Virgins, Vermont, the community I live in, around policing, systemic racism and policing bias, and other issues that I saw with the department in terms of the size and the scope of the work they were doing. And so over the last about year and a half since the film came out, lots unfolded in our community. We've had independent review of the police department, looking at sort of the amount of police staff we have on hand. And so that report just came out, and our city council is looking at it currently. Some of you who might live in the community recently found out that our police chief has decided to resign a year before he was planning to retire, so that's also occurred. And unfortunately, the one element that I find most important, sort of looking at the racial bias component of our police department, which has some of the highest perceived bias in stopping black and brown people in the state, based on data collected and analyzed by an economics professor at University of Vermont, hasn't really been addressed or really talked about. But I think overall, the community is very strong. We're willing to have these conversations and seeing potential for moving forward.
So this second piece of the life of Stephen Bates, did the first film connect you with this subject matter of the second film?
Yeah, obviously, having worked on one film on the community, I've become aware of people in politics in town, and our city manager, Ron Denman, at the time, had explained to me what was going on with this group of historians and local citizens that were uncovering a lot of information about Stephen Bates, and with the help of his great-grandchildren. And they thought, what a great way to try to commemorate beyond this historic marker, but actually telling some sort of documentary story on it. And I was 100% in from the moment I heard about it. I thought it was a really powerful story and just extremely important to make sure that it's told. Because as you can tell, he died in the early 20th century, and it took over 100 years for us to document this in an impactful way, even though at the time he had such a strong role in the community. And so I think that was another impetus for me wanting to pursue this space, to make sure that we actually do something meaningful.
I find it incredible that the two pieces you did somehow connect to law enforcement and race in this tiny little city of Virginia. It's kind of a phenomenon. Didn't the Bates family just recently have a reunion? Were you part of any of those festivities?
Yeah, they did have a reunion in Virgins. I wasn't able to attend anything, unfortunately. I was not in town, but it's great that there's such a strong connection between the Bates family now and Virgins. And yeah, it is really ironic that I've done two films in two different years on policing in Virgins in particular. One sort of looking and critiquing our current department, and the other sort of recognizing the achievements of a black person that was a police chief and a sheriff in the community. I think one thing in particular that I would like to highlight here is that there was a $10,000 bond involved with Stephen Bates at the time in which he ran for sheriff. And I think that's really telling to understand, and a lot of the films that we just watched really unpack these really important issues that I think for a predominantly white audience, it's not familiar. You don't quite grasp, oh, why, that is interesting that things are presented through a specific lens. And in the case of a police chief or a sheriff, someone with a lot of power in the early 20th century, having to put up that much money really diminishes most people, and thankfully Bates had someone willing to put up that money on his behalf. But I think as we think about why there's systemic problems in our society today, it's really important to understand sort of lineage that's unfolded to get us to that point.
Now let's, we did talk a little bit before today, Chris and and we thought it'd be kind of interesting to turn the questions really to you guys, because the other two films are kind of heavy in some of the topics that they bring up, some of the emotions they bring up, maybe some of the ahas that some of us might have felt, or aggravation you might be feeling now on some of the topics. And we thought we'd talk with you to see what did you take away from with Get today that you didn't have when you first walked in because you saw these films. And we're going to ask you to raise your hand, and we have a microphone that will get up to you. These were pretty incredible films. I thought the second film, actually both of the second and the third films, I thought they were about different things, or one thing. And I feel like after watching them both, in succession especially, that they could have gone in almost 6 different directions and would have had a full documentary on those directions. And they touched upon different things in terms of race, and equity and equality, ecology, it was geography. I mean, there was just so many ways to dice these issues up. And these filmmakers are so adept at kind of finding that one straight line that can kind of keep bringing them all back to the center so we won't lose our focus, because they're all so important, all these issues. So, who had any kind of aha moments or uncomfortable moments? Right here. Thank you.
It was a comment, excuse me, it was a comment in the second film when there was that session with the white gentleman running for when Marquetta said, I think it was Marquetta who said, it's the descendants of the people who enslaved us who were still running the show. And I hadn't thought about that before. I had thought, I've been thinking for years, why are people with very little supporting a party that does, it seems to me, nothing for them? So, for example, 50 Republican senators, not a single solitary one of them voted for the IRA. Well, there may be a lot of financial things with which they did not agree, but one of the things was the first real propositions to do anything about climate change. Nary a Republican senator voted for it. And then you hear Kentucky is literally going under. Why do those people keep voting for those politicians? And that's how do you educate people around that? And how do you change the fact that that white guy, as Marquetta says, we are resilient, we are working. You accuse us of sitting here doing nothing. You don't see it. Anyway, I could go on, clearly.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. We have another one in the back. Is there a hand in the back there?
No.
No, you change your mind. Over here. Thank you for that.
I guess for me, around the Stephen Bates, I was curious, what questions came up for me was, I wanted to know more about his background and like what he left behind, his family. I'm wondering, as a black man coming to Vermont, was there any other black people in Virgins? And what about his family? What did he sacrifice? Where was his family? There's something about it that felt a little glorification of sort of good white people doing something. And just wondering about more of the story, just wanted to know more of the story, because I just think there's a risk of that a little bit. Although, and just, I wanted to know more about the family and about him.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, you know, the information that I present in the film is the information that we have on hand. And I think that really comes down to how much historically we kept of Black culture in northern New England in particular. And so the historians working on the project gleaned as much as they possibly could about his life and to present a picture that was as accurate as possible, right? Without getting in the weeds about, you know, hypothesizing about what might have occurred to Bates in certain times of his life. And so that was the project at hand, was really to unfold what they could actually get from documentation, which was pretty thin. But yeah, I would love to know more. I mean, the one element of the story that wasn't told, because again, it's just hard to pick and choose where to tell the story without it going on too much longer, was that a lot of this started with a group of photos from the area in Massachusetts where Stephen Bates' descendants actually moved to. So he had 2 children, and they both married, or actually one of them married someone in, I'm forgetting the town in Massachusetts, but anyway, there was a photo collection by a white individual that was taking photos of a historically Black community in the area, and had these sort of prints and left them with his family, and then that family brought it to the historian who saw in the film at a university that was looking at the collection to try to understand, because it's very rare to have such a swath of Black historical photos archived. And there was actually a log attached to that photo collection. There was numbers, and they found out through, oh, this number corresponds to the family that was in the photo. And that's when there was a connection there with the Bates family, because it was, I believe it was the descendants you see in the film, it was their father as a child in this beautiful print of their, I guess, great-grandfather sledding with them in the community. And so that was the impetus to understand more about their family lineage, and finding out through word of mouth history, they had known that Stephen was a police chief in some town in Vermont, and so they looked and started talking to people at Virgins. There was historical records at a church in town, and that's sort of what created this connection, re-bridging this connection in Virgins in particular. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
There was a piece of her question that I would like you to speak to, and that was, I'm going to say it this way, the white privilege we have to tell their stories. And I remember this came up when we were screening for Gens, and it wasn't lost on you, I think, that, you know, white skin, you're able to tell the story of a Black history, of Black culture. Can you just touch on that? And
yeah, it's something I've grappled with, in particular, telling 2 stories as a white individual talking about race in a predominantly white space. On one hand, you know, I've had a lot of people ask me, in particular after my first film, what kind of reaction did you get from your community? I mean, it's a community of 2,500 people. And I said, you know, was there any revolt from the police department? And I was like, no. And that goes because I'm a white individual and I don't deal with the daily racial bias that exists. And so that's really, you know, on one hand, something that I take very seriously, but I also try really hard to, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, understand and educate myself and listen to others and to have more empathy and understanding for what's going on, and trying to use my privilege on some level to be a catalyst to having conversations. And so, yeah, that's been a goal of mine.
thank you. Right here in the middle.
I just wanted to, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I remember from discussions that were had when you were making the movie, just to add a couple details, that Stephen Bates, I think, was married in Virgins, and I think there's a record that he owned a house there. So those are 2 other small details we know. And then I just personally wanted to say, I had a conversation a long time ago with an African-American director when we were doing a play together, and I asked him what was my responsibility. And he said, that's for you in terms of understanding racial divide in America. And he said, well, that's your job to figure out. And I think each of us have that journey to take. And I just want to say, watching both of your films have been an important part of that journey for me. And I really appreciate this film shining a positive light on a part of our history. And it's useful in this day and age to be, when there's so much division and so much negativity, I think a film like this is really useful because though a lot of negative things happened to Stephen Bates, he was able to overcome all those things. And for me, whenever we can empower ourselves or someone else to do that, it's important.
Way in back.
I think the difference also between your film and two other films was that the other two films were really told from their personal perspective of living people, and Bates' stories basically told as, you know, glimpse into the past. One comment, also Bates appeared to be quite light-skinned, judging also by family members. That could be a factor of him being accepted. Also, there were so few people in Vermont, they never really formed like specific communities, and communities are being always seen as a threat. Individual people may be tolerated. I work as artist at the Sheldon Museum, and we have very little documentation of people of color and different races, and we are just beginning to piece together the story of various people, non-white people in this area. They lived here, we just don't have documentation, or we have very little, so here there is appeal. If you know of any collections, please let me know, because it's really important to document it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anything you want to add?
The wow moment for me was when there was that comment about the billions of dollars that is spent on housing and how so little of it has gone to anybody but a white society. And when you realize that wealth is handed down from generation to generation, when you don't allow a group of people to own land, then it not only affects that moment, but it affects the future generations hugely.
Yeah, it was 98%, I think, went to white families, the funding. A stunning figure, actually. Thank you for bringing that up. So today was a really heady kind of way to start the day. You have all day to kind of let these thoughts that are going to bubble forth kind of ruminate in your head as you watch some of the great films going forward for the day. I just want to give Chris the last word and ask you two questions. One, what was it like when you found out you won the Show Life's Award? And what's next for you?
It was very rewarding to, and I appreciate the award. I mean, to be honest, yeah, it's tough because, you know, I think I put a lot more blood, sweat, and tears into my last film, and I think it was a little bit more controversial, but certainly an important topic, and we should definitely be recognizing the work that my community did to commemorate Stephen Bates, and so I'm really thankful for the opportunity to show this film here, but I would just like to end with, I think we all have a lot more work to do still, and consistently to do, to understand and educate ourselves on these very important topics, and so that's what I would leave with. But my current project, I'm working on another documentary. This one's about Proposal 5, Article 22 here in Vermont, the Reproductive Liberty Amendment. For those who don't know, we're going to be voting, if you're a Vermonter, in November on a state amendment to the Constitution, potentially enshrining the right to abortion. And so I've been following that since last fall. We'll follow through the vote and kind of synthesize it all. So, yeah.
So no lighthearted comedy.
Just hard cutting issues.
Okay, very good. I want to thank you again, Chris, for being here and for your great work. I want to thank all you guys. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day.